Hello everybody, welcome to the Mayor and I episode. I don't know what it is, but it's been going on for a long time now. I'm interviewing Nick Buckley about a number of things. Nick Buckley, man on a mission, former parliamentary and mayoral candidate, and who knows what's coming next for Nick. So welcome, Nick.
I think it might be England manager.
Well, I would love that. Don't get me going on about Gareth Southgate. I mean, what's worse now, we're through to the semi-finals.
I've set you off now.
Yeah, we're through to the semi-finals. We got through on penalties against Slovakia, and he's now celebrating like he's some sort of god. We've played dreadfully all the way through. We've been lucky. It was again Portugal we were playing. Yeah, it was Portugal we were playing against, wasn't it? In the quarterfinals, and no, that's France. Sorry, I'm getting confused now. I'm bewildered. Excuse me. No, it was anyway. It doesn't. Anyway, the point is, he's now being celebrated as some sort of hero, and he's saying how fantastic, and he's done nothing all the way through.
He might get a job in a Labour cabinet.
He would fit very well in the Labour candidate with his virtue signalling. And in our last episode, you started talking about harmonious behaviour amongst the people in the country, and I watched a very interesting podcast by a chap called Joey Barton, and I think you know him of him.
I know of him. I know him.
He was a former Liverpool footballer. I think he played for Glasgow as well at various points.
I remember him saying once that he was better than Zinedine Zidane.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was a reasonably good footballer, but I won't say he was extraordinary. Anyway, he did an interview. I'm just trying to find the name. I need to find the name of the chap. So yeah, he did an interview, and it was headed up. This podcast was headed up. White British will be a minority in the UK by the 2050s, and the actual headline, the very melodramatic headline, actually kind of belied a very interesting conversation that he was having with a chap called Rafe Hadel-Mankou.
Yeah.
Who is based in London, works some of the time for the New Culture Forum. With
I've met him a few times.
Have you met this chap? Yeah, he comes across as a very nice chap. He's highly knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Highly knowledgeable. And the interview, Joey Barton thankfully didn't say that much. And the interview was actually really, really interesting. It was about things like slave owners and blacks, how the lives of black people are far better, in the colonies and in the UK than they are in Africa and all. It was very, very interesting. One of the points it covered in the last episode was that he mentioned the immigration figures, and he wasn't that obsessed, was Rafe, with the boats. He said those numbers are quite trivial compared to the real numbers. The real numbers is actual immigration. You and I talked about this the other day, which is predominantly Pakistanis, Indians and Nigerians. And 1.2 million people were immigrated. There were 1.2 million immigrants last year, which was more of all the 90s and the 2 decades of the 80s and the 90s, basically. So those were quite staggering figures to hear those. And Rafe Hadel-Mankou said this is the biggest crisis facing Britain now, far greater than Brexit or anything else. Basically, his view that this was kind of existential.
Not just for the UK, for the West in general. For
the West in general. So I would recommend to our viewers, please watch it, despite the dreadful headline.
Well, the headline, this is several years old, the headline.
Oh, is it?
These headlines came out of university papers.
Right.
That have looked at the rate of immigration and who's coming, and these universities' reports were predicting this a couple of years ago. So Joe Barton's not made this up. These are university reports.
But then interestingly, while Rafe was talking about this, Joey Barton then started to talk about football, which, as you know, is an interest of mine. And what he said, which I think really struck a chord with me, I'm not sure he knew what he was articulating, but I think he was right. What he said is, when you get on the football field, it doesn't matter what the colour of the person is, what their religion is. It's all about the team and the team playing together with an objective and an achievement and whatever. And he said, then when we go back to our houses afterwards, we do the stuff we do as individuals. The Muslims go back and do their whatever. But when we used to play, we played as a team, and the manager wouldn't tolerate anybody not playing as part of the team and doing that. And then he kind of went on to say, I remember when I was young, when we were young and there were Muslims or whatever, they would practice their religion, but they practice it at home. But they, within the day-to-day life of England, they adhered to the culture and the principles that the British people had. And I suddenly realised that's what's happened here, isn't it? We were a harmonious people in the 80s and 90s. There were lots of... I mean, he said himself, I remember Rafe said, I remember in the 80s, Daley Thompson, Kenny Lynch, the comedian, there's a couple of other people he mentioned. We didn't even think of them as black. We thought of them as British. But at that time, the different cultures celebrated their cultures when they got home in the privacy of their own home or in the privacy of their own communities. They didn't allow it to seep into the day-to-day life of what is culture. And you and I have talked before, what is British culture? What is the undermining of British culture? Well, actually, it doesn't matter how many black people or brown people or whatever people there are in the country. If the culture works as it did in the 80s and 90s, then they can go back to their house in the evening and do their individual. They can go back and be, Muslims, go back be Jews or whatever, and practice that. But it never seeped into the central community then, because the central community was effectively a Judeo-Christian Christian culture that had been around for centuries, basically. And I thought that was a fantastic analogy. The problem now is when people are emerging from their houses and going onto the football field. In the middle of a match, they're suddenly throwing down a mat and praying towards Mecca. In the middle of a match, they're suddenly saying, I don't like Jewish, I'm pro-Palestinian. In the middle of a match now, they're saying, we should have a transgender player on the pitch now. And all these, what I would call private beliefs, are now being paraded and inserted into British culture. And that's what's causing the problem.
I think that is looking backwards with rose-tinted spectacles. All that's happened is these problems...
I'm glad you've agreed with me on this one.
All that's happened is these problems have just increased by several magnitude. And now the middle class can see them. All those problems you talked about then, I could see growing up as an 8-year-old. Living in a community that was slowly changing into a heavily Asian Muslim area. So these problems aren't new. I remember being at school, and for the first few years we're all together in assemblies, but then suddenly half of them were my friends, the Asian lads were given permission not to attend assembly anymore in case the head mentioned God or Jesus. So they would all then not go to assembly. I remember being in working for the council, and we had a room there that was specifically for Muslim prayers. I was on Llandudno Pier, 2 days ago. And right on the pier, on a sunny day, this Muslim woman takes out a rug, starts praying on Llandudno Pier. And it was like, what are you doing? So all these things have happened over time. You talk about sport. I remember in the 80s, demonstrations at rugby matches because we were playing South Africa, people throwing nails on the pitch so the South Africans couldn't play, all about how wrong apartheid was. All that's happened now is the middle class have noticed, and it's affecting the middle class. People like the gentleman we just talked about then, Rafe Mandel. So he can see it all happening now because he's a nice middle class man. But this has been going on all my lifetime, and the poorer you are, the more working class you are. I've been saying this the longest, because since we've had mass immigration, since the Windrush generation onwards, the people who have complained about it the most have been the poorest people in society, because it was always them who were the first people to take the hit, the financial hit, the changing of their communities.
But this is the erosion, you agree this is the erosion of British culture though?
it's, yes, slowly over time. You can't
Yeah.
point to when it started happening.
No,
So
no.
So
But,
to begin with,
no, but my argument is that the reason British culture has started to erode, because you and I have talked, because I gave that example a few months ago to you about, because I think one of my relatives, I won't mention who, I said, oh, would you be happy with 50% immigrants? Yes. Would you be happy with 80% immigrants? 90% immigrants? Yes. And I couldn't think of a comeback.
Yeah.
Because what's the problem with 90% immigrants? But I think the problem with 90% immigration is British culture's gone. The culture we talked about.
Then it's then no longer England.
Yeah. But it's not just that. It's there's competing cultures.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. So there was a form of British culture, crude as it may have been, to do with judo, to do with Christianity, to do with fish and chips, to do with whatever it was. There was a form of British culture. Now there are multiple cultures, all competing. And that's what's causing the erosion of British culture, because that multiple competition of cultures is what erodes the national progressive spirit. And I don't mean progressive in terms of progressive spirit, in the same way a team. If you have multiple people in a team thinking, running, behaving in different ways, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's what the damage to our culture is. The fact we have multiple competing cultures, and now they're given the time of day, whereas when we were very young, they weren't. I went to a school, I went to Hare Hills Primary School in Leeds. And anybody who knows Leeds and Hare Hills knows that is a really rough area. I would say 50% more than that of my classmates were Asian, black, or whatever it might have been. However, all of us embraced a Judeo-Christian culture. We said the Lord's Prayer in the morning. The environment that we all lived and worked in was predominantly an English culture, basically. And it seemed to work. And the reason
I wouldn't say it worked. I just said it would. It seemed like it worked. It kept the peace, and it kept the peace because immigration was so low at that time.
Yes. The two are linked. I understand.
But as you get more and more immigration, and as a trait of our culture is to be, some people won't believe this, but our trait is to be welcoming, to be fair, a sense of fair play. The mistake we made was saying to people, we've had this conversation before, your culture is just as good as our culture. So keep your culture, keep all your traditions, and live your life as if you're in Pakistan, as if you're in Mumbai, as if you're in Lagos.
Yeah.
And these new immigrants went, okay, yeah, thank you. So they take all the best parts of our culture and keep lots of part of their culture, which by definition is a failing culture to a certain extent and a lesser culture to our culture, to a Western culture. Otherwise they wouldn't be here. And so we've made this bed ourselves. And once we've got identity politics in the mix, then this is just ramped up over the last 20, 30 years, but I would say definitely the last 10 years. And it's ramped up even quicker now because of the internet, because of social media, because it's so much easier now to pass ideas on, to talk to people, to become part of a community that they all think these communities are important, but they're not important. It's the bigger community that's important.
Yeah, and it's the re-establishment of that bigger community, which is a cohesive, and it doesn't matter to me what the colours, what the religions are of that community, as long as we're all thinking and behaving in the same way for the benefit of the country.
There's no country in the world throughout the history of mankind that had large immigration and it worked out.
Really?
Just isn't. It always leads to war, always leads to slaughter, because once we get hard times, we become tribalistic animals again, and we fight for our tribe. And in our country now, half the people we meet, we wouldn't include them in our tribe anymore now.
Yeah.
So, you're Muslim, you're Indian, you're gay, you're this, you're that. You're not the same as me now. So when bad times come, they're the first person to be killed because you're not the same as me.
Well, I think what's interesting, you've had 2 videos on recently, and both of them have had remarkably high viewings. One related to Nigel Farage and these what appeared to be an actor
for the Channel 4
setup. Channel 4 setup.
The other one, 40,000 views on that now.
Well, that's fantastic. One of the other one, which was very interesting to me, was us talking about something that Calvin Robinson said, the vicar. And Calvin Robinson, quite, I think, it was quite shocking, and I think I said at the time, said that basically he believed all, and by the way, I've rewatched the video, so I know he did, all Pakistani Muslims should be deported. Yeah. That's what he said, you know, and I was, you know, we discussed it, it was a 5-10 minute chat. It had, again, something, I don't know, it had over 10,000 views, lots of comments basically, and I want to read out one of the comments here. And not many negative comments, by the way. There were a couple that calling you a fat racist, but I thought that was rather harsh.
Calling me a racist?
I thought that was rather harsh, Nick. I got away scot-free. One of the most informative and inspiring videos I've seen this year. The benefits of mass deportation of foreign nationals are beyond measure. Property prices and rentals should be less insane. We should have easier access to our services, i.e. a civilised A&E, less crime and costly justice, and we should feel more in control of our country. So, our own country. So, there's definitely there's a strong feeling about this now. And I think what's interesting, what was interesting about that video, it was taken off by YouTube, wasn't it?
It was. I got an email going, this video's been taken down, it's a hate crime offence, you've got a strike now against your channel, appeal if you want to. And I thought, I'm not...
And has that happened before?
Never before.
Wow.
And I thought, we've not said anything. So it gives you a timestamp, as in this is the timestamp where hate crime.
And what part was it?
Well, it was you.
What?
It was you saying, inter-cousin marriage in Pakistan is leading to lots of disabled babies and mentally ill people.
Yes.
And it was the mentally ill connected to a country that...
Oh, really?
Yeah. And this is all done by AI.
Yeah.
So that got stamped as hate crime. I reckon someone reported it as well.
I think someone must have reported it, yes.
Someone must have reported it. So I appealed. And less than 5 minutes, the appeal came back, which amazed me.
So do you think somebody watched it?
Yeah.
Then when they bring an appeal in, presumably a human being then watches it and makes the decision, do they?
Yes.
Yeah.
So to report a video for hate crime, it's a click of a button.
Yeah.
You don't have to timestamp it or talk about you just hate crime, and that then must go to an AI program that goes through it word for word to see what's being talked about.
So why would that be a hate crime then? Because if that's true, that this...
Well, that's why they took away the strike and put the video straight back up again.
Yeah.
Because YouTube has a lot of rules. You're not allowed. Some of the examples would be you're not allowed to talk about the different IQs of races.
Right. Okay.
You'll get your account wiped for that.
Really?
You're not allowed to talk about any particular race being obviously mentally more deficient, anything like that.
The different IQs. I don't want to get us struck off here, but different races do have different IQs. Now
it depends what you put it down to. So do you put it down to nutrition? Do you put it down to culture? So all depends.
No, for example, Asian like Chinese, Korean have a much higher IQ than Europeans.
We're getting on sticky ground now.
Yeah, we are.
But what I'm talking about, the channel.
Yeah, sorry, okay.
Fine. So the argument against that would be, well, you measure IQ by a test.
Yeah.
How biased is that test?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. If you're just stating a fact, it doesn't matter. If IQ is measured by a test and you make a statement about IQ from that test, it's just a fact. It's not a kind of subjective thing, is it?
Let's get off this.
Let's move off this subject.
Yeah.
Clearly, because I don't want you to have to appeal again.
So we got a strike for that, but then I appealed.
But what I just said then was a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Right. It was nice seeing you.
You might have to edit this bit out of the thing. So we got a strike for that, but you got us back on again.
Yeah.
But it was something we were talking about that I would suggest 3 or 4 years ago, if we'd have started that conversation, it would have been just taken off, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Off Twitter, off YouTube, off everything.
Well, we wouldn't have got those comments. People may have watched it and went, "Oh, I agree with all that."
But I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah.
So I think, gentle listeners, please do comment. Please say things you think and don't be afraid, because this is all about people not being afraid and saying things they think and believe and having opinions, you know, which is what...
And then please comment, because it helps the algorithm and push this up, because those 2 videos we've just talked about this last week, we've had 1,000 new subscribers to the channel, 1,000 in a week. I can't believe we've had it, but that's because of all the comments, and then YouTube pushes you up the ratings, the more people get to see the videos.
So I wanted to say as well, there was another comment which I wanted to read out. So that was a positive comment.
Yep.
Then the next comment was, and I think, so it said, when you say foreigners. So this related to another video that had a lot of views where we talked about crime statistics in Paris and in France. And basically the terminology, and hopefully it won't get us struck off, is that, you know, foreigners, some rapes in Paris, 77% of reported rapes in Paris are by foreigners.
Yeah.
So foreigners being people who are not born in France, basically. So one of the responses on that was, there were quite a few hostile responses on this one. One of the responses is, when you say foreigners, who are you talking about? English, Irish, German, Swedish, can we name this problem, please? Now, I was thinking about this, and I've put a note down here. Why does it matter?
We weren't talking about who were the rapists. We were talking about, why would you want to live in a country where 77% of rapists don't have to be in that country?
Yes, correct.
He's quite right. Some of those rapists may have been Germans, British, Irish, Americans, Australians. Well, I don't care.
I don't care either.
I just don't want them in my country.
Correct. So my view on that is, and I don't, maybe you're right, maybe this person is actually wants us to say the majority of these people are Muslims, or I don't know who they are actually, but
I get that I read that comment, and that comment to me was underhand, you're a racist because you presume all foreigners have brown and black skin. Yeah. We never talked about any skin colour.
We didn't talk about that. And I think the point we were trying to make is your government should do something about it. If 77% of rapes, majority of crimes are carried out by a tiny percentage of the population who have to be foreigners, the logical thing is get those foreigners out of your country.
And secure your borders so others don't come in like that. Yeah, exactly.
But I think you're right. They were trying to turn it into a racist point. And it wasn't a racist point, was it? It was totally... And I think that was, for me, really interesting because that was the point we were trying to make. It doesn't really matter who these foreigners are, and we talked about the margins, but the listeners didn't like to talk about the margins. But it doesn't matter, does it? If 77% of your rapes are carried out by a foreign person, a foreign national, you want that foreign national out, especially if it's one particular. We cited the Moroccans in Holland, didn't we, as an example? But I thought that was just an interesting call. It was somebody trying to make it into a racial...
They were underhand trying to call us racist, but they didn't want to come out with, you're a racist.
Yeah, because actually it's them that's a racist.
Because when they hear foreigner, they think of black and brown people.
Correct, yes.
I just think of someone who wasn't born in the country we're talking about.
Yeah. Saying that, the picture you did put on the thumbnail was mainly brown people, I noticed on that one.
Yeah.
But, I don't know if that was taken from the article, a picture of the actual...
they were convicted grooming gang offenders in this country.
Which has nothing to do with Paris, but anyway, that's fine. Okay.
It's hard picking thumbnail pictures. You want it to represent, but you also want it to go, what's that? So they click it, so there's a...
But again, that got a massive response.
Did.
So you've had, interestingly, 3 videos there that have all had massive responses and almost unrelated subjects, actually, I think. Because one related to the UK deportation, Pakistani Muslims, the second related to foreigners' crimes in Paris, and the third related to
Reform
and Channel 4.
And all our other videos are doing twice as well as what they used to a couple of weeks ago as well.
Well, I'm assuming that's because you've got a lot more followers, so people are now interested in listening. I want to move on from move back onto Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage, after he was elected, gave a speech, and I don't know if you saw the speech or you saw some of the footage around it.
I saw the footage,
There were 3 people at his, and I was thinking about this afterwards, and this totally makes sense, doesn't it? He's won an election, Labour have won their seats or whatever, the party's over, the election's happened. Why would protesters attend a press conference that he was giving for his seat in Clacton-on-Sea? Because actually, if I just won the seat of Clacton-on-Sea, I thought I want to bring a press conference to the press, tell them how happy I am about what I'm going to do for Clacton, whatever. why would a protester then say, I'm going to go to that?
For the publicity. Because they know this is Nigel Farage's first press conference after winning, after 8 times of trying, and let's disrupt it and we'll get in the press with our messages. And it worked. They got in the press.
However, it was more sinister than that, wasn't it?
Always is when it comes to reform.
And this started to get me questioning what the hell is going on here, because we had the conversation about the actor putting on what we call the rough voice, I think maybe regional voice would have been more appropriate, but he put on a fake voice.
He calls it himself.
He calls it rough voices.
On his website, he says, I'm expert in rough
voices, which in itself is a classist, faultless thing.
Well, you'd know that.
So he talked about that. So we talked about that, and that had a massive response. Now, what is sinister? So 3 people, one after the other, stood up and harangued Farage, calling him a racist or whatever. And Farage did well for himself. He stood up for himself or whatever. I don't know how it was done, but they have then, since this happened, have found that these protesters are actors. And they are actors who starred in Ken Loach?
Ken Loach. Yeah.
Ken Loach is a very progressive left-wing filmmaker. He's actually quite a good filmmaker. I think he made Kes, which is one of my favourite films as a child.
Yeah, it's okay, Kes. It shows the bleak times of the 70s and how we used to live. I mean, it shows that. I hated his film about the guy who died when he was trying to sign up Universal Credit, whatever that was called.
My Left Foot?
No, there was about 5 years ago.
Trying to sign on from the Universal Credit?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's a notorious left-wing, pro-Labour, whatever it is. I think he's actually quite a good film director. So these 3 actors, who are obviously left-wing, were actually in a Ken Loach film.
Yeah.
So you then immediately think, what the hell is going on here? First of all, we find an actor, and apparently people saw this actor speaking to Channel, in the comments that were given on our, people saw this actor speaking to Channel 4 before this all happened, before he did that. We now found 3 actors appearing at a press conference and trying to derail Nigel Farage as well. What the hell is going on here?
So they happen to be actors, they're also activists. So as an activist, you want to do that sort of protest. As an actor, all publicity is good publicity. So they've been in the press now, they've been in all on TV, that raised their profile. When they're sat in front of another left-wing director going for a part, they can say, I was one of the heroes at the Reform UK press conference and Nigel Farage, and that was me, and So nothing they've done hurts their career. In fact, it's the opposite. Hence why they did it. Maybe been paid to do it, because there's people out there, hope not hate. There's some left-wing millionaires out there who are crazy funding stuff. They may have even been paid to go do it. So for them, it was a win-win. Nigel Farage handled it really well, but he's used to it. And then once they found out they were actors and been in the films and all that, if anything, it flips it on its head, and it's actually very good publicity now for Reform UK.
Yeah.
Because Reform now only have to say, everyone who hates us is a paid actor.
Yeah.
Everyone who hates us is a paid actor.
Has to be paid to do it.
Yeah.
But it kind of proves our listeners are right with the comments they're making. They're saying there's conspiracy here, there's what, and it isn't. They're not conspiracy theorists. There are conspiracies here.
There's always conspiracies, always throughout the history of time. There's always, when it comes to power, of course there's conspiracies. There's always somebody wanting power. There's always someone who sees you as the blockage to me getting power. So we need to take you down. So all these things are always happening all the time.
And a very visible conspiracy happened in France.
Yep.
In the elections. So in the French elections, which are 2 stages basically. So the first stage, votes are cast, and the people who get over a certain percentage of votes move on to the second stage.
Yep.
So Marine Le Pen's, what's she called, Marine Le Pen? Yeah, she's called Marine Le Pen's party.
National Rally
Got something like 34% of the votes, far more than Macron's party, far more than one of the left-wing parties, far more than the other right-wing parties, or right-wing, I'll stop using that terminology. Then the left-wing parties, who were very left-wing,
communists.
Then Macron spoke to them, and he persuaded them to combine into one. So basically, we've now got a number of parties stood down.
Yep.
The extreme left-wing party, I can't remember, I'll tell you the name of the guy who runs it in a minute, and Macron's another party bonded together basically, and they frustrated in the second round of election National Rally from gaining a majority.
Yep, so now she's third, I think.
She's third, and they have a broken coalition government as a result. So what we've seen there is the politicians consciously subverting the will of the people by making strategic decisions to stop a very popular party from gaining power.
I don't see anything wrong in that. That is their system. They're entitled to do it, and that's how their system works. I think it's only a sticking plaster.
Yeah.
I think Le Pen will probably win the presidency in a couple of years' time.
Yeah. I think it's 3 years' time.
Yeah.
Is it?
Is
it 2 years' time?
27.
Yeah.
And there's a very good chance that this coalition government won't last long and will fall apart.
Yeah, I think they're already bickering.
Oh, absolutely. You can't have... Again, we think Labour here's got a problem in fighting, but wait till it's just a party of far left. You know, the main party there was talking about 90% tax for millionaires. France now, from what I've read, lots of millionaires and billionaires now are talking about leaving the country and moving their wealth out of the country, which then leaves them poorer, less taxes, but they want to spend more money. So this government might not last long at all until there's forced another election, and then we'll see what happens then.
The leader of the left-wing party is called Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is the communist you're talking about.
Right.
Now, one of the first things he's promised to do, you like this, he's promised that Arabic will become an official language in France after the election.
From what I've read online, that's been debunked. He's not said that.
Are you sure?
I've read that online saying he's not said that. Someone's twisted his words and blah, blah, blah. He's not said that.
I think what's maybe more disturbing than that, if that is wrong, and forgive me, readers, if listeners, sorry, if I didn't check that properly. What has definitely been said is the chief rabbi in Paris has now said, by the way, after the French election, there were riots on the streets of France.
Yeah. Both times on Sunday for the winning party.
For the winning party.
So not the losers rioting, the winners.
They were rioting. There were no French flags flown during those riots. Only, guess what kind of flags?
Free Palestine and Antifa. And,
yeah. Palestinian flags, basically. Following that and following the election, the chief rabbi in Paris, Moshe Sabag, he said this, and this is not a made up. It is clear today there is no future for Jews in France. I tell everyone who is young enough, go to Israel or a more secure country. Now that is a pretty amazing statement for a chief rabbi to make in a country.
It is, and it's a completely wrong thing to say on many levels. The first level is you've just rewarded your enemies, that if you carry on doing this, we're all going to leave. Well, we want all you Jews out of here, so we'll carry on doing this, and maybe you'll all leave.
But is this not the shadow of a previous event? I hate to bring everything back.
It is, but he shouldn't have said it the way he said it, as if you should leave. Well, no, you shouldn't leave. And it also then reinforces that feeling that Jews don't really love this country, because look how many are leaving now, going to Israel. They never really loved this country. They were here to use it. And he's played into both those traits there. And these traits can also be pointed at, Muslims in this country. So it's fallen. I think it's fallen for a trap there.
Because that kind of ties into something you feel quite strongly about, that you don't like these, what you call itinerant members of society in England now, like Rishi Sunak. You said that about him before, haven't you? You don't think Rishi Sunak is properly he's a traveller, basically.
Yeah, his family are travellers.
Yeah.
And this time next year he'll be in California.
Yeah.
With his family living.
Yeah. And is that why you have that view about what was said there? Because you don't think it's the correct way to think about your country. If you care and you love your country, you shouldn't be thinking about leaving it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if your country's got problems, you need to stay and fight for it. It may cost you your life, but that's how you got a country in the first place, because your ancestors paid for your freedom with their blood. Now, how can we criticise the millions of migrants invading the West and the UK? They're trying to get a better life. They're trying to, they're coming here for that, and when they get here, they don't. The vast majority of them don't love the UK, love England. They still love their own country. So, but they should have stayed in their home country and fixed their country and turned it into a utopia. Now, for the chief rabbi to be saying to young Jewish people in France, it's time we all left and you need to go to Israel. Well, you're just telling the other people who live in the country that, first of all, you don't love this country the way we love this country. Because if my country was under attack, I'd fight and die for it. But you as a Jew, you'll just flee somewhere else, won't you?
Yeah.
He's playing into those narratives which do the Jews and other minorities no good whatsoever.
Yeah.
He should be saying, we're going nowhere. We're French. We love this country. So many of our people have died for this country and we're staying here.
Yeah.
And the only way you're going to get rid of us is if you kill us all, because we're French and we love here. And I'll spill my blood on this land. That should have been his answer.
And interestingly, your views, I think, are echoed by Bernard Henri Lévy, who's a famous French Jewish philosopher. And what he said is the left is once again kidnapped by the infamous Mélenchon. Divisive language, hated the Republic. So he's attacking this is something we see in the UK, isn't it? People attacking the UK. Around him now are some of the incarnations of the new anti-Semitism, a chilling moment, a stain. But then he says, continue to fight against these people. That's his view.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Yeah.
You don't concede ground. Now, I'm sick of some of the right-wingers in this country who talk about we need to build our own set of institutions, we need to build new universities, we need to build this, we need to develop that. And I'm going, no.
Fix the existing
You go
ones.
back into those institutions and you retake them.
Yeah.
Stop giving ground to enemies. You don't win a war by retreating all the time thinking we'll make this our home now. And then you invade again, we'll make this our home now. Fight for what you love and fight for what you believe. Verbally and politically if you can. But if it turns to violence, then at some level you have to fight violently in wars. I'm not talking about in a civil society. So they stay and fight for the country they love. And if you don't love the country, move to Israel. Yeah, of course, it's a sensible option if you don't love France.
I'm not sure I'd move to Israel this time, would you?
No, but if you don't love France,
I'd probably move to Italy.
Then move to Israel.
Yeah, I'd probably move to Italy, which I'll talk about later if we've got time. There was a survey done across 200 countries identifying racist countries, the most racist countries and the least racist countries.
Yeah.
Based on things like, would you like a Pakistani Muslim living next door to you, and things like that, whether he says words. So, if you were one of the left-wing progressives waiting anxiously for the results of this survey, where would you think the UK would arrive on that?
It all depends who does the study, how fair it is. So,
let's assume it was. I think it was a fairly fair study. Yeah.
If it was an unfair study, it all depends on the matrix of how they measure these things. But I would expect that study to say England was 79th in the world, just behind Zimbabwe. If it was a proper fair study, I would say England would be in the top 5.
Yes.
Least racist countries in the world.
England was third least racist country in the world.
Yeah.
And it was behind Brazil, which I think Brazil is renowned to be non-racist for all sorts of reasons, and Sweden, which has probably one of the biggest migrant problems currently in Europe. So I think a lot of people, certainly the progressives on the left, would be surprised. This is something you and I have always said, that we believe England to be non-racist. I always said in the 90s, I thought a lot of racism had ceased to be an issue at that time. I'm far now more aware of my colour than I was in the 1990s. But I think a lot of Labour supporters, I think a lot of left-wing progressives, a lot of your pink hairs, your trans gingers, as they're called, would be surprised by that result.
They wouldn't believe it. And the reason why they wouldn't believe it is because the vast majority of those people have never left the UK, apart from a Benidorm holiday, where
That's a really good point.
where you're just with other English people on the beach.
Yeah.
I've done, as you can see, I've done extensive independent travelling. I've been around the world several times, for months and months. I spent 2 years travelling around the world. I came back once or twice during that 2-year period, but I spent most of 2 years abroad travelling, backpacking, staying at hostels, staying in dumps. Didn't have much money. You go to anywhere in the world, first of all, they're nearly always more happy than we are.
Yeah.
Even the poorest countries are normally happy than we are. So that gives us something to think about. But they're all so much more racist.
Yes, I agree.
All so much more
I agree. And I, like you, have done a lot of travelling, and I've seen a lot of racism around the world. I mean, one of the worst places for me where it's race, and it's kind of worse than racism because it's a class system, is India and the caste system.
Yeah.
The way that they treat different described castes.
And you're born into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You never get out your caste.
Yeah.
You're born into it.
Yeah. And yes, I agree. There's a lot of racism in all sorts of countries, and interestingly, a lot in countries where people have got dark skins.
Absolutely. I mean, you want to talk about racism in an African country? Let's talk about the Rwanda genocide.
Yeah.
1 million people hacked to death with machete because you were the wrong black person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to talk about racism? Let's talk about the transatlantic slave trade, where all those people who were sold into slavery were captured and sold into slavery by black people.
Yeah.
White people had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
They were just the buyers at the end of the market, which was completely wrong, but they were the buyers. The whole industry was created by black people for black people to make money off white people.
Yeah.
And we also then have to wonder, more slaves were sent to the Middle East than were ever sent to America.
Yeah.
Why do we not have black people in the Middle East now? And that's because when the Arabs bought black slaves, they castrated all the males because they didn't want any of them breeding.
Really? And the modern day slave trade, 6 million people.
More slaves today alive than at any other time in history.
6 million in Africa at the moment. Another interesting thing in the Joey Barton interview that Rafe, and I do recommend if you can, I don't know if you could put a link on your one of these things. This constant attack of white people in the UK, reparations, all this sort of stuff. At any one point, there were no more than 3,000 slave owners in the UK. Most English people, white people, and I include my great, we're talking 6-7 generations back now, grandparents, were basically living a form of serfdom in the UK. There was a very small minority that owned slaves. Yet there is now talk about this generation of white people, mostly who descended from effectively slaves themselves in the UK, having to pay reparations to black people.
Yeah, so first of all, let's explore this myth straight away. If reparations are owed, and there's a case for that, if reparations are owed, then it's black people in Africa who need to pay the money. Because they're the ones who caught their neighbours and families, they're the ones who sold them into slave markets, and they're the ones who then sold them onto white slave ships.
Yeah.
If reparations are owed, it's black Africans who need to pay. And if we're looking
because interestingly, all the slave ships which were staffed by Europeans, only ever went to the coast.
Yes.
And the slaves were brought to them.
Slave markets on the coast.
Yeah.
Run by black kings and emperors.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So that's the first thing. If reparations are owed, then the British are also in line for reparations, because we spent a fortune ending the international slave trade.
Yeah.
And we used the Royal Navy to patrol the high seas. Thousands of British sailors lost their lives, usually through disease, because it was the tropics. We captured hundreds of slave ships, released those people into freedom, and it cost us a fortune. It cost us that much money to end, because again, with the British Empire, we bought the freedom of every slave in the British Empire. And people say, well, we never should have done that, we should have freed them. Well, no, because the law said they were property. And what we do in this country is we follow the law. Those slave owners want to release those people unless we compensated them for a loss of an asset. So we paid for that freedom. We had to take a loan out. That loan was finally paid 20 years ago or something. I can't remember the exact date now, but about 20 years ago, we finally paid off the loan to free the hundreds of thousands of slaves in the British Empire and made them free people.
But the more fundamental point for me, Nick, is that most of the white people in this country their antecedents never had the benefit of slaves. No. My antecedents on my mother's side were silk dyers. They lived in small houses, lots of them in there. They used to drink at the silk dyers pub in Leeds, basically. They didn't have slaves. No. Their ancestors didn't have slaves either. So most white people, my mother included, me, my half-white part, never had the benefit of slavery. Why do I have to pay reparations for slavery?
Yep. Well,
and Anna's parents were hinge makers.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you have people living very, very poor lives, not making much money, living, probably working for somebody who, maybe one very rich person doing it. Why does this generation who never benefited at all, have to pay reparations?
Well, again, they shouldn't. I've told you who should pay reparations, but then dig a bit deeper. So at the height of the transatlantic slave trade and the height of slavery in America, an African slave in Mississippi lived 9 years longer than a man working in the north of England.
Yes.
He lived 9 years longer. Why? Because his life was easier.
Yeah. More importantly than that, and this is something that Rafe mentions in this video, currently in the West Indies, West Indian Africans live 15 years longer than Africans from Benin, where most of the slaves came from. So even today, black people in the UK, black people in the West Indies have a better quality of life than the black people in Africa.
Yeah, so in a perverse sort of way.
Which is why not many black people go back to Africa.
None of them do. and some who have tried hate it and come back because they think they're going to be welcome. They're open up. Brother, we find you, Kunte Kinte. We find they get robbed. They're treated as foreigners. They don't know the culture.
Correct.
But come think on slavery. So what most people don't know is at the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, we also had a European slave trade with the pirates from North Africa, the Barbary pirates.
Yes.
Were raiding parts of Europe, but also the UK. They reckon up to 1.25 million white Christian Europeans were taken into slavery over those years.
Oh, really?
And sold on the North African slave markets and sold into the Ottoman Empire. It was because of that slave trade was why one of the reasons why we developed the Royal Navy the way we did, because we had to patrol our coasts. You know the song Rule Britannia?
Yeah.
Rule Britannia will never be slaves. That was sung because of the white slave trade, because we were saying we're not going to be slaves. We're not going to get
involved in that. And where were these Barbary pirates based in? Where did they come from?
Round about Tunisia.
Right, okay.
North Africa.
Yeah.
And what people don't know is Lundy Island, which is an island near Bristol or near Wales in the coast bit, was completely taken over by Barbary pirates, and that's where they took the slaves when they took them before they got shipped to North Africa. And Oliver Cromwell had a dictate to the Royal Navy that any pirate ship you find, you drowned all of them.
Really?
He specified you drowned all of them.
Wow.
That's how bad it was in the UK. There was times where we had no fish in some of these seaside resorts because fishermen would not go out to fish because they were scared of being caught, but when they were out fishing was when the pirates would come and raid their village and take away all their wives and children. Really? Hundreds were taken.
This is on the southern coast of England.
Yep. Yeah. Devon, Cornwall, round there. And we had
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, most people don't know our history.
I want reparations for that.
Yeah, exactly. And we had to send some famous lord to the Barbary pirates, and he spent a decade haggling with them and buying British people back off them one at a time. And more money we raised in the UK, he'd go back and buy more of the British people.
I want some money back.
So that's how. So slavery's happened to every person in every country and every continent throughout the history of the whole of mankind until the British said no more, and then we stopped the vast majority of it.
Was that William Wilberforce? Was that something else?
Yeah.
So I get that and I fully understand it, but the bit that staggered me was there were only over 3,000 slave owners. So what I'm saying is reparations is a nonsense for me because most white people in this country have never benefited at any point.
Not at all. And in America, there was a couple of thousand black slave owners in America running plantations.
Who were freed men and then started getting...
And they had tens of thousands of slaves.
Yeah. I didn't know there were these white slaves. I mean, if you had, say, 20 slaves, what would your mix of black and white slaves be if you had a choice?
50-50.
50-50.
And I'd let them fight it out.
Because you're not racist. You'd have 50-50 slaves because you're not racist. That's why.
Thank you.
That's the question you should ask more people, isn't it? So I read this thing about... We've staggered off onto the slave thing, which I think is interesting, but I read this thing about Britain being the third least racist country.
Yep.
An important statistic, viewers. So Britain is proven to be the third least racist country in the world, and that kind of makes sense to me. In terms of my perception. Like you, I've travelled a lot as well.
Just look around the country.
Look around the country.
Look who our leaders are, our politicians. Look who's running all the big businesses. Yeah. Look who the poorest people are in society. Look at who's in prisons. You look around, you go, this isn't a racist society at all.
Well, I mean, if you had a choice, Nick, of a next door neighbour either being a black person or a Scouser, what would you decide in that situation?
It'd never be a Scouser.
There you go. That just proves the point. There's no racism in this country.
I'm kidding. That abuse I got last time.
So I read this, and then almost immediately afterwards, I was looking at the football on the BBC Sports app on somebody else's phone, because obviously I don't have a TV license, so I can't look at anything to do with the BBC. But I was looking at somebody else's phone at this article.
Yeah. You weren't touching the phone because that then could class that was in your possession at the time.
Really? Oh, right.
So they were holding it with them.
They were holding it.
Right.
And
You don't need a license then.
I asked them to scroll through it for me, actually. So I didn't actually touch it.
That's fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So there was an article, or there was an interview of a guy called Troy Townsend, who is a former head of blacks against race. He's a black ex-footballer. I've never heard of him before, actually.
A famous one, obviously.
Yeah, obviously not that famous. Who headed up something.
Yeah.
And then he's expressed concern for the black English players taking the penalties in the last. I've forgotten who we were playing.
Yeah.
He's expressed concern. Oh, it was the Netherlands, wasn't it? Was it? Yeah, it was the Netherlands. He's expressed concern for the black English players who are taking the penalties, that if they miss, they will be subjected to horrific racism, basically. One of the players who took the penalties is a player called Cole Palmer, who plays for Chelsea. Are you aware of him? He's been a prolific goal scorer for Chelsea, and most of the discussions have been about why hasn't Gareth Southgate played Cole Palmer more, basically. Now, if you look at Cole Palmer, he's he's actually born in Wythenshawe. He's a classic Wythenshawe looking kid, skinny, blonde, sort of a typical Manchester young lad, basically, skinny. So he took one of the penalties, and the article said it was only black players who took the penalties, and I'm like, Cole Palmer isn't black, but apparently he's a quarter black. But to look at him, you couldn't tell. He looks more English than you do, Nick.
But if you've got any black blood in you these days, it's best to claim you're black because it comes with a lot of privilege.
I don't think Cole Palmer does that. Cole Palmer's a really nice guy. Actually,
probably is.
I really like him. He's a fantastic player, and I didn't know until I saw that article that he was even black.
Yeah.
So this guy here is saying whatever, and then he said, "We have seen white English players miss penalties before, but they are never targeted or described by the colour of the skin. That is what makes it so unique against those black players who took the penalties on Saturday." Now, to say white English people are never targeted because of their skin is one of the greatest misstatements and horrific things I've ever heard. White people now who've done nothing, who don't even miss penalties, are now targeted on a daily basis because of the colour of their skin.
Yeah.
We're talking about not targeting black people because of the colour of skin if they miss a penalty. Who's looking after all the white people who are daily targeted by the media, by race grifters, by everybody for the colour of their skin? And yet he can say that about a black player who misses a penalty. I just think it's outrageous.
2 points there. Let's talk about the football first, and then let's talk about the white in general. So the football. So when he talks about black...
Sorry, Switzerland. Apologies, listeners. Switzerland, yes. I've got it right. I knew that. It's Switzerland, yeah. I think we're playing the Netherlands tomorrow.
Right. When he talks about black players getting abused and missing penalties, he's talking about 2 competitions ago, but the Euros, when the 3 black players stood up for penalties and missed, and a lot of abuse online. The abuse was only online, and when they analysed where all the accounts were, it was something like less than 1% within the UK. It was all Egypt, it was in Africa, it was Pakistan, a lot came from Pakistan and India and the Middle East. So that's where the racism came from. So it wasn't hardly any white English people at all. And if you want to talk about players getting abuse, do you remember when David Beckham got sent off during a competition?
Yeah.
And when he came home, there was effigies hanging from lampposts and outside pubs.
Yeah.
Dummies being hung by the neck with David Beckham's name on it. That was a type of abuse that white man got.
Yeah.
Because some people take football far too seriously.
Yeah.
So you will get abuse if you miss a penalty. The reason why those players may get some abuse from English people because of the colour of their skin is because every time they're mentioned by everybody else, their skin colour's mentioned. We had Diane Abbott the other day saying, Reform have got 5 MPs, but look at the 5 black people who scored the goals to save England. Everyone keeps mentioning their colour, and then you wonder why other people then mention their colour. No one cares.
Cole Palmer isn't even black.
But they're claiming him as one of theirs because he's got a bit of black blood in him, in which case we only like black people. You've got some black blood in you, we're okay with you. If you're fully white, you're evil. So they just keep showing their own racism. It's all projection. Because they're racist, to project their feelings and thoughts onto wider
society. Because I don't think anybody's even thinking about the colours of the penalty takers. I wasn't when I was watching it.
No one cares. When you're part of a team or you want your team to win, you don't care. You just want to win. But then if we're looking about, the second point was about the white racism all the time.
Yeah.
You're quite correct. As a white person now, you're racially profiled and abused all the time.
Yeah.
Mostly underhand, and most people don't see it. But you are the fact, we talk about those players' colour of the skin, is in fact anti-white racism.
Yeah.
When you celebrate that 5 people took penalties and they're all black, what you're basically saying is white people can't take penalties.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's what those same people would have said if we'd have celebrated 5 white people scoring penalties.
But I don't think, I mean, as a brown person myself, who, as I say, in the 90s, I'd forgotten my skin colour.
Yeah.
I remember when once somebody mentioned it in a conversation, I was like quite shocked.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was the same as everybody else. Yeah. Surely they don't want to be labelled all the time as black players either. Why do they want to be labelled?
I'm sure they don't.
Especially Cole Palmer, who isn't actually black.
But I'm sure, I bet he's not saying anything about it.
Cole Palmer wouldn't, because he's all he's interested in is playing football.
Well, that's not why he's not saying anything about it. Because how does it look when a white person says, I'm not black, and you get ashamed of being black, are you?
Yeah.
He's scared. He's like, I'm saying nothing, I'm scared stiff, I'll be cancelled.
Yeah, yeah.
And the others don't care. And so it's always somebody else who finds someone else's colour important.
Yeah.
It's very rarely the person themselves who's achieving something in life. It's very rarely them. It's always other people who are race baiters, who are looking for any excuse to bring up the issue of race.
Because I don't think Cole Palmer will have grown up thinking he was black or labelling himself as black or whatever, or anybody around him. But now he's famous. He's now being labelled as black all the time. That's the bit that I don't get. And he must be quite bewildered, because he must be saying, I don't think of myself as black.
I reckon he's been told, say nothing.
Yeah, I think so.
Whatever you say,
yeah,
you're going to get yourself in huge amount of trouble here now.
Yeah, which is not fair to him, is it?
It's not fair on it. It's a type of bullying.
Yeah.
So he doesn't get now to decide what race he is.
Yeah, I know.
He's been told what race he is.
Yeah. You're black and only black people can take penalties. That's what they've said to him, basically. Yeah. And he's like, I didn't even think about it before I came here. Nobody's ever mentioned it to me before.
Yeah. Well, you didn't even know.
I didn't know.
Growing up, 3 of my best friends growing up were mixed race.
Yeah.
And all 3 of them looked completely white.
Yeah. Yeah.
But these things only matter today.
Yeah.
They didn't matter not that long ago.
Yeah.
Only matters today.
But why it sticks in the chronic is that it comes hot on the heels of as being told that we're one of the least racist countries in the world as well.
Yeah.
But they constantly go on about it. They just won't shut up. But what I want to do now is, in football, they're always doing this stop hate, stop racism. Yeah. What I want to change those to is stop white hate, stop white racism. Because that's what it is now.
It is.
That's all racism is to me now.
And there's going to be a huge backlash if these people don't stop. And that Troy guy, that footballer who's part of this,
Troy Townsend,
he's only involved in this because...
Anybody know who he played for?
Because he's got nothing else.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know his name.
Yeah.
He makes his living at representing whatever the organisation is about racism in football. People only listen to him when he's talking about racism in football. Then it's a World Euros at the moment, so he's got some airtime. And that just keeps his career going. That just keeps him relevant, earns his money. He's a race baiter.
Yeah.
And we need, hopefully Reform might start doing this, we need people to start calling these people out to their faces and saying, you, sir, are a race baiter. In fact, I'll go one step further. You're a racist.
Yeah. They are racist.
They need to be called out.
But I was in the pub in a not a posh wine bar, a proper pub.
Yeah.
I won't mention the name of it. Surrounded by working class white men predominantly. Yeah. I would say. In fact, I think it was. We were there for the penalties. Nobody said, "Oh, it's black people taking penalties." Nobody even mentioned the colour.
No one cares.
We were just interested in the quality of the penalty and whether it went in or not. That's all. Nobody cared. But it became an issue after the event. People who don't care about football.
Yeah. The only people who care about it are the race baiters.
Yeah.
Because it gives them something to talk about.
Yeah. Finally, just if we can finish on something not light, but something I was quite pleased at. We talked about Glastonbury a couple of
episodes.
And how angry I was with this Banksy thing floating around and the hypocrisy of whatever it is. I was pleased to see Noel Gallagher, who's a Manchester lad, as you know, coming out and saying and talking about the hypocrisy of Glastonbury. And what he was saying is, people are just virtue signalling in these situations. He said they should keep their mouths shut. He said the singers should sing their songs and get off stage. And the people in the crowd, if they want to virtue signal, just give money to a charity to support it. But he said it has no place. And what happened there has no place at Glastonbury. So I think what's good now, he's spoken out. But Ricky Gervais has spoken out.
Well, those two people would always speak out because they don't care. They've got enough money.
Yeah.
Noel Gallagher doesn't care.
Yeah.
He's always been that type of person. You never say he was a woke person anyway.
No.
But hardly anybody.
He needs a haircut.
Yeah, hardly anybody else in the music industry will say what he's just said.
Yeah.
And I would imagine he classes himself as a true musician. He's not an entertainer. He's not an activist. He would say, I make amazing music. And some of his albums were amazing.
Yeah.
And I think he looks at it and goes, I hate all that crap. I hate the way X Factor ruined bands. I hate the fact that the internet has made nobody's famous. And there's no bands like him anymore.
No.
And I think he looks at the virtue signalling going, it just makes me want to puke.
Yeah. Yeah. But I was pleased to see somebody else saying it, and also a famous singer saying it as well. It was nice. It was nice to see.
He's, on the grand scheme of things, he's a nobody now. On the grand scheme of things, most young people have never heard of him. Most people know. We think Oasis. Oasis was like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
The height of Oasis.
Yeah. That's when you had your mullet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and he'll be accused now of, listen here, Grandad. I believe you did some good tunes back in the day, but you don't know anything about music now. So shut up and get back in your Zimmer. That's what most young people would say to him now, who go to Glastonbury. So his voice will not be heard in the vast majority of circles.
I'm so glad I raised that now. Nick Buckley, NBE. Thank you very much. And what's your new catchphrase?
Man on a mission.
Man on a mission. We look forward to seeing what that mission is. Bye bye, everybody.
See you later. Did you enjoy that video? I think you did. Come on now, hit that bell, subscribe, comment. Let's build this channel. I need more followers. I need more subscribers. Be part of the journey. See you soon.